Okay, great. All right, and it looks like we are also live streaming, so welcome everyone. Before we begin, I just wanted to share some recorded remarks from Queensborough President Donovan Richards. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Good evening. I'm Queensborough President Donovan Richards. Tonight's workshop is being co-hosted by Housing Court Answers in my office. I'm joined today by Satishi Nori of Legal Aid Society, Jordan Dressler of the New York City Office of Civil Justice, Jenny Laurie and her Housing Court Answers staff, Helen Jang and Brian Lee of Korean Community Services, and finally, Anna Yeli Gomez-Britton of my office. I'm proud to gather so many thoughtful facilitators to help Queens residents during these trying times. As you may know, the national and state eviction moratoriums have been a stopgap against mass evictions and homelessness. And as these deadlines approach at the end of this month and in October, it is imperative to connect tenants with aid to avoid more hardship. Tonight, we'll be talking about the state of these moratoriums, tenants' rights, and lastly, tenants' resources that will be posted on our website for future reference. This event is also being recorded for future reference. So thank you for joining us. Please take this information and utilize it, pass it on to your neighbors and to anyone you know who's suffering during this time. Thank you, and I will now turn it back over to my staff. Have a great evening.
All right, a big thank you to Queensborough President Richards. I'd just like to quickly introduce myself as well. My name is Vicki Garvey. I'm a planner with the Queensborough President's Office, and I will be moderating tonight's workshop. So I'd just like to note that we also have a glossary that we are posting in the chat for folks who may not understand some of the acronyms that we'll be talking about tonight. We'll try to explain or use the full phrase before we use the acronym, but just in case, feel free to have this open in your browser so that you can follow along as we discuss tonight's topics. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first segment. We will be hearing from Jenny Laurie of Housing Court Answers and Alyssa Warma from Legal Aid Society, who are going to be talking about the state of both the New York State eviction moratorium and the national eviction moratorium.
Great, thank you, Vicki. Just gonna share my screen. So, and thank you so much to the Borough President for hosting this important workshop tonight. I know people statewide are really anxious about the end of the moratorium and about evictions, and it's great to get information out there to folks. Housing Court Answers is a nonprofit. In non-COVID times, we run an information table in the Queens Housing Court where we help tenants connect to attorneys and we help folks connect with rent arrears assistance. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what's going on and hand it over to legal aid folks and to OCJ folks for Office of Civil Justice folks to go into more detail. As many people know, the New York State moratorium, known as the COVID Emergency Eviction and Foreclosure Prevention Act, expires at the end of this month, at the end of August. It was put in place at the end of last year to basically slow down evictions or to stop evictions so that the state could distribute rent arrears assistance to the hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers who've been impacted by the COVID pandemic. Last week, 2 weeks ago, the US Supreme Court invalidated one part of the moratorium, and I'm sure people have seen this on the news. That part was called the hardship declaration. Tenants who filed the hardship declaration were able to freeze their court cases so that they wouldn't move forward. And so the Supreme Court has changed that. I just want to mention as an aside that homeowners can still use the hardship declaration to stall their foreclosure proceedings. But tenants should not move out. There are still protections in place for tenants. Tenants are protected if they file for the emergency rent assistance program run by the state. There's $2.6 billion in that fund. So there's lots of money for tenants who owe back rent. It pays up to a year's back rent and 3 months going forward. So there's a lot of money in that fund, and folks should file for it. We'll talk more about that later. The other thing that people have that protects them is the New York City right to counsel law. So New York City tenants are protected in eviction cases. If they get taken to housing court, they can get connected with an attorney to represent them in a non-payment case or what's called a holdover case if they face eviction. So there, as I said, there are still protections. And there's also something called the Tenant Safe Harbor Act that protects folks. So I'll pass it back to Vicki or to the legal aid folks to talk in more detail about this. Stop my share there. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think others are going to talk in more detail about ERAP and other tenant protections in a few minutes, but I did just want to mention that there is a federal eviction moratorium right now that you may have heard about. A couple of weeks ago, the CDC issued an order stopping some evictions through October 3rd of this year. However, it doesn't stop every eviction, and you do have to take action if you want the protection of the order. So in order to be protected, you need to fill out something called the CDC Eviction Protection Declaration. This is available online in multiple languages. You need to send that to your landlord and to the court in order to get the protection of that order. But this will only stop the actual eviction. This doesn't stop eviction cases from moving forward in the way that a hardship declaration did before. So the best thing you can do right now is to apply for the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, or ERAP. That is much better protection even than the CDC moratorium. And so that's, if you're eligible, that's absolutely the first step that you should take. But we know that a lot of people are hearing about this CDC moratorium, so we wanted to make sure that people are aware of what it is and how you get the protection.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. That is very helpful just to get both perspectives for tonight's workshop. So now we're going to move on to the second segment, talking about tenants' rights. So we'll be hearing from Jordan Dressler of the New York City Office of Civil Justice, as well as Satish Nori from Legal Aid Society. They will be giving an overview of tenants' rights within this current ever-changing housing landscape.
Thank you, Vicki, and thank you to the Queensborough President's Office for hosting this important workshop. My name is Jordan Dressler. I'm the Civil Justice Coordinator of the City of New York. I oversee the city's Office of Civil Justice, and we're very proud to support the Legal Aid Society, Housing Court Answers, and other nonprofits in providing legal information, legal advice, and in-court legal representation for New York City tenants who are facing housing instability, including those who are facing the threat of eviction in New York City Housing Court. So, New York City is the first city and the largest city in the country to establish a tenant's right to counsel law. We hear that term a lot. I wanted to explain a little bit about what that means. But before I do, and I'm going to turn to sharing my screen now, if I can remember how to do that. Bear with me. There we go. Before I turn to the right to counsel specifically, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the work of my office and the legal services that we make available. So my office, the Office of Civil Justice, OCJ, provides free legal services to New York City tenants who are facing eviction, who are facing harassment, who are facing disrepair by landlords who aren't taking appropriate action, and a range of other housing-related issues. We'll get to the right to counsel law here in New York City in a moment, but the purpose of the law is to ensure that all tenants facing eviction cases in court have access to free legal assistance. In addition to the right to counsel, we provide access to free legal assistance for tenants in a range of other housing-related cases, including legal representation and advice for New York City tenants to help maintain and preserve their housing and protect against harassment, disrepair, other forms of misconduct by unscrupulous landlords. We also have a housing help hotline, which we're very proud to partner with the Legal Aid Society, who are partners here in this workshop. to provide phone-based advice and information to New York City tenants across the city, regardless of zip code, regardless of income level, to provide phone-based advice and information to New York City tenants who have questions or just general concerns about landlord-tenant issues. And I want to stress this, all of our legal services are available citywide in every zip code, and I can't stress this enough, regardless of immigration status. I want to turn now to the right to counsel law and how it's being implemented here in New York City. So the legal services are not provided directly by the city. We have contracts with nonprofit organizations across New York City. They are law firms. They are nonprofit law firms. And so the lawyers that work at our contracted partners will work with you and protect you and maintain your confidentiality, notwithstanding the fact that we are funding the services. And they range from large organizations with decades, if not over a century of experience like the Legal Aid Society, to smaller community and borough-based organizations across the 5 boroughs. Legal services are available to all tenants facing eviction proceedings in housing court or NYCHA administrative proceedings. As some of you may know, the New York City Housing Authority has its own system for bringing certain cases of eviction against their tenants if they're seeking to have them displaced that goes through an administrative process. The right to counsel law applies to those proceedings as well. And those services are available at or close to the first scheduled court appearance. There is an income screen, but I'm going to explain what that means. For tenants whose households are at or above 200% of the federal poverty guidelines. And this year that means $53,000 for a family of 4. Those tenants who are facing eviction and at that income level or below receive full legal representation. What does full legal representation means? It means having a lawyer on your case, stand with you to represent you in court from the beginning of the case until the case is concluded. Just like folks who are in the criminal justice system have a public defender with them on their cases, this is a similar approach with respect to housing cases. And New York City was the first city in the country to do it. For those households who are earning more, the law says that brief legal assistance is available. But I will say that many cases involve requests for waivers of that policy to permit full legal representation by a legal services provider, even for those who might be making moderate income or above the income limits. And particularly now, at a time of great uncertainty, those waivers should be pursued. And so do not hesitate if you're in court to ask if you can get full legal representation. So how do you get these services? Well, right to counsel legal providers are available to assist unrepresented tenants in eviction court conferences. Since I'd say April or May of last year, a small number of housing court eviction proceedings have been moving forward in the courts through the various moratoria and protections. And throughout that process, we've been able to work with the Housing Court Administration and our legal services provider partners to ensure that, in addition to having ways to access legal services prior to the cases appearing in court, in addition to having phone-based advice, that we were able to have in place in the court proceedings themselves available legal services to be offered to tenants who appear in court either virtually by teleconference or in person in the courthouse. Make available to them access to legal services. And that remains the case today in Queens Housing Court, where in all of the court calendars where cases involving unrepresented tenants are being heard, we have legal services providers, including the Legal Aid Society, who are appearing in the cases to provide to provide access to legal services and offer those legal services to tenants who are in need. There are other ways to access legal services too. Our partners at Housing Court Answers, their numbers are here, and I know this information will be shared later. You can call them up, and when your case is on a court calendar, Housing Court Answers will be able to direct you to the legal provider who is able to help you. You can also call 311 and ask for the city's tenant helpline, who will connect you either to our legal advice line or directly to the legal provider. You can email us at ocj@civiljustice@hra.nyc.gov, or you can visit our website, where there's a list of nonprofit law offices near you with the right contact information. I strongly suggest not to try walking in to any of these offices, particularly at this time, but the website and phone numbers of all of our legal services providers are on that website, and they'll be able to provide help too. So with that, I want to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Satish Nori, who can talk a little bit about what actually happens in housing court and what to expect and what protections there are there for tenants. Satish?
Thank you so much, Jordan. We're going to share our screen, and I want to thank Jordan and the Office for Civil Justice, was it the Office of Civil Justice, for their support, as well as the Queensborough President and Housing Court Answers. We are lucky to live in New York State and in New York City, where we have these protections, and they allow us to navigate yet another dangerous crossroads that tenants are facing during this pandemic. So let's talk about the existing protections for tenants. We heard about the Supreme Court decision, Chrysophis, earlier. And so that took away one of the strongest protections. But in New York, we have this web of protections. And so while the Supreme Court took away one strand of that web, we still have 3 other ways that tenants can be protected. But you have to pay close attention to make sure that you're covered by one of these other forms of protection, because if you're not, or you don't take action, you could be evicted in the very near future. And that's going to be a shock to many people, because for the last 18 months, there were almost no evictions in New York City. So the first one is ERAP, and Alyssa mentioned that. And I think our colleagues are going to talk more about ERAP. ERAP is a rent assistance program. One of the advantages of ERAP is that if you apply for ERAP, your landlord cannot evict you while the application is pending. And you can apply for ERAP if you owe any rent to your landlord, whether or not they've taken you to court for that rent. So it's a very significant advantage. Apply for ERAP. Now, I see some comments already from landlords who are saying, well, where do I get the money? Well, guess what? ERAP flows to landlords. It's $2.7 billion. One way to look at it is it benefits tenants. Another way to look at it is this is money that flows directly from tenants to landlords. And so I would encourage you to participate in the ERAP application process with your tenants. Landlords have already gotten tens of thousands of dollars in rent assistance through ERAP. So if you're a landlord and you're wondering what's out there for me, ERAP is a big part of that. The next thing is the Tenant Safe Harbor Act. So the safe harbor period is the period during COVID from March 2020 through June of 2021, as declared by our former governor as of 2 days ago or a day ago. So during that safe harbor period, if you owe rent to your landlord, you have a defense to the eviction proceeding. They can't evict you for owing money during the pandemic. Unfortunately, that safe harbor period has expired. It only covers March through June, March of 2020 through June of 2021. But for many people, they owe money during that period of time. You can't be evicted for owing money during that period of time, but you have to raise this defense in court. And fortunately, you're very, very likely to get a lawyer if your landlord takes you to court, thanks to OCJ and the universal access to counsel that we have in New York. The final one, as Alyssa mentioned, is the CDC Eviction Protection Declaration. Now, this is something that comes from the federal government, and it basically says that if you live in an area where there's a high incidence of COVID, which includes all of New York City, then you can apply for protection under this law, this regulation. And basically it says that allowing people to be evicted and homeless makes COVID worse. So that's why the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, got involved and said, if people apply for this moratorium, then they cannot be evicted. But as Alyssa mentioned, the landlord can still start a case and move that case forward. The only thing that this stops is the marshal actually coming to execute the warrant of eviction. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Alyssa to talk about some other defenses that tenants have.
Thank you. So we wanted to make sure that you're aware of all of your rights as a tenant. Some of those rights do come out of these specific COVID laws, but just in general, there are rights that you should be aware of. So as Satish mentioned, if you have applied for ERAP, the court should pause your eviction case. You need to remember to give the court your application number. That's the number that's emailed to you once you apply. But once you give them that number, the court should pause your case until the state determines if you're eligible for those funds. We want to make sure everyone knows, it's been mentioned before already tonight, but you have a right to stay in your home until a judge orders you to leave. It's illegal for a landlord to change your locks on you. You should, even if you're being evicted, even if you get a rent demand or a notice of termination, you should absolutely stay in your home until a judge says that you can't anymore. We have laws to protect you, and a legal proceeding has to happen before you can be evicted. If you need repairs or if you're being harassed by your landlord, you can start a case against your landlord in housing court. There are other resources available, including Housing Court Answers. They can usually give tenants advice about how to start these affirmative cases against your landlord to get repairs or to stop harassment. And another, just reminder, you can call 311 and ask for the tenant helpline. That helpline is manned by attorneys at organizations like the Legal Aid Society and other organizations throughout the city, and they can give advice about a pending eviction case, advice about how to apply for ERAP, or advice about getting repairs or stopping harassment from your landlord.
Now, I see in the chat, before we go any further, and thank you, Alyssa, a lot of questions from homeowners about what they're supposed to do. So as Jenny mentioned at the top, the protections under CFPA also apply to homeowners, and many of those protections still continue after the Supreme Court struck down the tenant portion of the law. Secondly, the state has a homeowner assistance fund that you can apply for through Homes and Community Renewal, or whatever it's called now, the Division of Homes and Community Renewal. So check that out. It's called DHCR. And finally, foreclosure proceedings are not going forward to the best of my knowledge. So there is this gap that allows homeowners to catch up. And again, if you have a tenant and they're eligible for ERAP, which almost everyone is eligible for ERAP, encourage them to apply and get that money. And that should help you pay your mortgage and other bills. Okay? So I understand the frustration, but remember, we're all in this together.
Thank you so much, Satish. And I just want to remind everybody who's on tonight's Zoom that we will post a single document of all of these slides so that all of the information presented here will be accessible, and you'll be able to refer to it at a later date. So now we're moving on to the third and last segment of our presentation part of this workshop. And I do see your questions in the chat. We will address them momentarily, but first we will be talking about tenants knowing their resources. And I would like to introduce Brian Lee of Korean Community Services, who will talk about the ERAP that we've been talking about tonight, which is known as the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. So Brian, if you'd like to share your screen.
Hi. Sure, give me 1 second. Okay. So firstly, thank you, Vicki, for and the Queensborough President's Office for hosting this extremely important workshop tonight. My name is Brian Lee. I'm a senior coordinator from Korean Community Services of Metropolitan New York, or KCS for short. We are a nonprofit organization based in Bayside, Queens, assisting all of our community members in need. Now, before we jump into it, I just briefly want to share with this audience our 7 locations where we provide not only the emergency rental assistance program, but various services ranging from workforce development to mental health to senior aid, and many, many, many more, with offices located in Queens to Brooklyn, all the way to New Jersey. With that being said, our mission statement is, we strive to be a one-stop through which people, regardless of their immigration or financial status, can access the opportunities and resources they need in order to overcome health, economic, and social barriers to thriving in American society. So with that being said, what is the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, or ERAP for short? It's the program that was launched on June 1st by the Office of Temporary Disability of New York State to assist households behind on their rent that have experienced financial hardship due to COVID-19, and can provide these 3 benefits to households. Firstly, it provides rental arrears or owed rents for up to 12 months prior to today. Second, it provides prospective rent or future rent for up to 3 months based on your income and a percentage of the rent that you pay. And thirdly, it provides utility arrears if you are approved for rental arrears up to 12 months. And that is paid directly to the landlord. That's paid directly to the utility company. And also the rental arrears is paid directly to the landlord. Next, how do you qualify for the Emergency Rental Assistance Program? In order to be eligible, tenants must be able to prove all 3 of the following criteria. Number 1, your household income must be at or below 80% of area median income, or AMI. And I have a chart below showing the AMI of Queens as of today. So if your household is 1, if you live alone, then your gross annual income cannot exceed $66,000, $66,850. If your household is a size of 2, then you cannot exceed $76,400, so on and so forth. Number 2, the member of household received unemployment insurance or experienced financial hardship due to COVID-19. And you're able to prove this through either your taxes, your 1040. You can also prove this through W-2s. And the state is also actually accepting self-attestations. So it's a very flexible and very simple, easy program to apply for. Number 3, you must be in arrears. You must owe prior rent at your current residence, which must be in New York. If you are current on your rent, if you have paid all of your rent up to the current date, then you are ineligible for this program. Next, how do I apply for the Emergency Rental Assistance Program? Tenants and landlords must apply on the OTDA portal. Now, this is an online portal. I have the link down below. There is no actual physical applications allowed for this program, so please remember that this is an online application only. The tenant or the landlord can apply first. There's no particular order, but both the tenant and the landlord must eventually apply and must eventually be linked to each other for the landlord to receive payment from the state. If the applicant requires application assistance, oh, sorry, let me just go right back. If the applicant requires application assistance, they are able to either call the OTDA hotline at this number below, or they can contact Korean Community Services or many other community-based organizations to create in-person appointments for direct assistance. Now, our hotline number is below. Our email is also below. I'll talk a little bit more about this on a slide that's coming up. Next, what is the OTDA portal? This is just a quick screenshot of what the home page looks like, just to familiarize everyone here with what it looks like and what to expect. So here's where you'll sign up, either if you're a tenant or if you're a landlord, and eventually you must link each other, the tenant and the landlord, to be able to receive funds for ERAP. With that being said, here at KCS, our ERAP team is designed to help in-need community members to avoid eviction through direct and indirect assistance. On the right, you'll see again our hotline number for answers to any questions you may have on ERAP or to schedule in-person appointments. And our dedicated email address is below there as well, where we'll respond to your questions or, again, make in-person appointments for us to provide direct assistance or answer any of your questions. Thank you for listening, everyone, and we look forward to helping you with ERAP or the Emergency Rental Assistance Program.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Brian. Next, we're going to hear from Kayla Papachet from Housing Court Answers. She's going to be talking about what they do and a hotline that you can call.
Hello, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen briefly. 1 second. Okay. All right, so hello everyone. I'm Kayla Papachet, the Queensborough Coordinator at Housing Court Answers. They mentioned us a little bit briefly in other presentations, but what we do at Housing Court Answers is we provide a multitude of services. Similarly to the Queens Community Services, we consider ourselves like a one-stop shop for various different services you may need, such as if you need a direct referral to a legal service provider, if you have a court case or a court date, you can call our hotline. If you have any general questions, not even necessarily needing to be in the housing court, but something related to housing court or your housing situation, you can call us. If you're in need of repairs or your landlord is harassing you. We get calls for a variety of different issues, and tenants come and talk to us. And what we like to do is take their specific and individual issues and come up with, taking all the pertinent information and giving them a plan that they can go ahead and follow through with that information that we provided for them based on what they specifically need. So we don't necessarily follow any scripts, just specific guidelines. And anyone can call us as long as you are not represented by an attorney and looking for legal advice, then you can call our hotline. So again, we do direct referrals to legal service providers, such as to the Office of Civil Justice. If you have any questions about your housing court case. And another thing that we do is we also, give basic information about ERAP, but we also do our own tenant rent arrears screening for services like the Bridge Fund or Coalition for the Homeless. So we have a specialist that does those direct referrals that you really can't get anywhere else. So you can just call us. When you first call our hotline, one of our representatives will screen you and see if you're eligible, and then they'll pass you over to the specialist who will, determine further eligibility and then do a direct referral for you as well. And so, our staff, we are multinational. We speak English, Spanish, French, and Bengali. But, fear not, if you have a language that is not one of those, we also have access to a language service hotline so that we can get a variety of languages at any moment: Russian, Polish, Urdu, whatever you need, call us, we'll find it. And so if you need help with ERAP in Queens, these are the several groups that we'll give you the information to. We'll give you their numbers if you call our hotline. So you know about the Queens Community Services, but there's also HRA'S Borough and Catholic Charities. And in our Brooklyn office also, we have a representative who's also working with the Met Council to do ERAP hotline questions. So give us a call if you have any other issues and any concerns about what to do. And then this is our hotline. So we're open Monday through Friday from 9 to 5, except when the housing court is closed during federal holidays. You can call this hotline number right here at 212-962-4795. And if you want to go to our website to find any general questions that you may have, we make posts. We have different formats and different forums about whether, various different issues. If you live in NYCHA and you want to know how to do a grievance letter, call us for anything. We're pretty good on that. Even if it's not directly housing court, if it's something related to the court, we might be able to give you information about where to go to get assistance for that. So again, we're Housing Court Answers. We have our information tables usually in the housing court. Since the court's closing, we've been working remotely, but we are a citywide service. So give us a call at any point. And yeah, thank you for allowing me to speak about what we do here.
Thank you, Kayla. And lastly, we're going to hear from Anayeli Gomez-Brattain, the Director of Immigrant Affairs at the Queensborough President's Office. She will be talking about the Excluded Workers Fund.
Thank you, Vicki. Thank you everyone for being here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the New York State Excluded Workers Fund, and it's not completely directly with the rent assistance or rental benefits, but it is a program that the New York State was able to provide to many immigrants, to many folks that were not eligible for unemployment assistance. So I'm going to share my screen. Here we are. So I'm just going to give an overall view of the New York State Excluded Workers Fund. Spanish, Fondo para Trabajadores Excluidos. The applications are open now. The applications are online only. And you can go to this website to find out more about the application process. And so, okay, what is the Excluded Workers Fund? So the Excluded Workers Fund is a one-time payment for workers who lost income between March 27, 2020 and April 1st, 2021, but are excluded from the state unemployment insurance and federal COVID-related assistance. So as you know, many folks lost their jobs, are underemployed or unemployed, but were not able to apply for unemployment insurance by the state or the federal level. So the state, thank you to all the community advocates who really fought for that. So the state has allocated $2.1 billion for excluded workers. And so there are two tiers where folks can apply. So the first tier, depending on the applicant's documents and if they're able to provide enough evidence, would be able to get up to $15,000, $600, or tier two, depending on how many documents they're able to provide, they can get $3,200. And so who is eligible? There's 4 criteria. Number one, if you lived in New York State before March 27, 2020, and you continue to live in New York State. This is a state program. So you have to be a resident of New York State. Number two, you are not eligible for or did not receive unemployment insurance or any other COVID-19 income relief. That's again, state or federal. You need to have earned less than $26,208 in the last 12 months prior to April 2021. And again, you needed to have lost at least 50% of the weekly work-related earnings or household income at any point in between February 23rd, 2020, and April 1st, 2021, due to the total of underemployment, if you were not able to work because of COVID-19, many businesses shut down. So if you lost employment, you may be eligible for this benefit. And just giving an overall view, what do you need and how to apply? So again, applicants need to have documents to prove three things: identity, residency, and work-related eligibility. So identity, again, most of the folks that are applying for this benefit are either out of status or undocumented immigrants. So an ID-NYC card can be something that they can prove their identity. Residents, say some type of utility bill, a lease, anything that can prove that they're living in New York State. And then work-related eligibility. So there is a long list of documents that can be provided, and depending on how many documents they can provide showing that they lost employment or became underemployed, they would be eligible for the 2 tiers. So there's a full list of documents, and that could be found again on the Department of Labor website. And we are going to share the PowerPoint presentation after this. So you can go through all the documents that may be eligible. So how can you apply? The state actually assigned and funded a couple of community-based organizations around the state to provide help. I think there's about 39 across New York State, and there's many in the cities in the 5 boroughs. And there's a full list of community-based organizations that you can reach out to, and they can provide help. Our office too, we have our Immigrant Welcome Center. You can call our number, 718-286-0644, or you can email us, and we can also assist you with the application or refer you to a community-based organization. We will be partnering up with a community-based organization to come to Borough Hall, where we can help you assist and fill out the application. So if you have any questions, please let us know. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna Ellie. That was great. And thank you to all of our presenters tonight. You've been doing double work by presenting and answering questions in real time in the chat. So I really appreciate that. And with that, we are going to transition to more of a Q&A, but we will ask everyone to please type your questions or continue to type your questions into the chat. And I will do my best to call on questions that seem to be asked by multiple people in the interest of time. And I will also let you know that everyone here on this presentation is able to be reached, but please feel free to reach. Sorry, I just realized I muted myself. Please feel free to reach out to our office to be connected with anyone if you had any other specific questions that weren't answered tonight. I realize this is a very tight presentation timeline, so of course we want to do our best. And so I'm just going to go ahead and go back through the chat and see. There was one question I saw. Somebody had asked if a tenant does not want to apply for ERAP or may not qualify, what is the best thing that the landlord or the tenant can do in that kind of situation? And I guess those are two different situations, but I just want to pose that to the presenter group to answer.
Right. So we've had many clients actually, a lot of tenants that are wary of applying for ERAP, especially because of public charge, or they may think that it will affect their tuition, or their just something within their personal lives that will affect. And I can say for sure that it will not bring any public charge, and that ERAP only affects exactly that, just your just helping for rent. So if you can convince or actually make clear to the landlord and to the tenant that they won't have any public charges brought against them, and that this is only to provide rental arrears, there's a sort of comfort that you can bring to them. And I also have an actual page that has more information on this that I can send to you, Vicky, and you could maybe distribute it to the audience. So let me shoot that over to you after this meeting is over.
Thank you. That's great. I did see someone asked in the chat regarding documents for, I believe it was either ERAP or EWF. Apologies if it was one of those. There was a question, are documents proving residence ID or prior wages, or a combination of all three? Possibly maybe we could talk about just an overview of the documentation required, or if you may not have all the documents readily available to you. If anyone wants to take that question.
Sure. For ERAP, there's 4 forms of documents that you'll need to provide. One is your identification. This could be any form of ID, from your driver's license to your NYC ID card. And like I said before during my presentation, a lot of self-attestations are being allowed for this program. So you can even just write that I live in this residence, and then if you just sign the bottom of the page, they accept that as well. The second one is proof of residence. You can prove that by either a lease, it could be an expired lease, it could be a utilities, it could be your ID again. Number 3 is income. You can prove that either by showing your taxes or your W-2s. And again, a self-attestation is acceptable. And the 4th one is your monthly rent amount. That can be shown either through your lease, again, it could be expired, or it can be a written attestation from your landlord, signed from your landlord, and that is the monthly rent amount that proves that's the 4th document that you'll need. So that's the 4 for ERAP.
And I did see there was a question specifically for the excluded workers fund. Someone had asked if you have a social security number, do you still need an ITIN number?
For ERAP, you do not need a social security number. You can either provide it if you want, or you could just leave it all blank. You do not even need an ITIN number.
And I saw that you unmuted, sorry.
Yeah, for excluded workers fund, if you have a social, use your social, but if you have an ITIN number, they will take that ITIN number.
Great. I did see a question in the chat about, I think it was a landlord asking if a tenant had not worked in 2020 or did not collect unemployment, what are their options for ERAP as well?
If a tenant has 0 income, they are allowed to fill in what is called a 0 income attestation. All they have to do is write again in a letter that they received no income during those times, or if they received unemployment, they can show their 1099-Gs, or again write a self-attestation stating that they received unemployment insurance.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. It looks like a lot of questions were also answered in the chat in real time. Feel free to restate your question if you feel it wasn't answered. We still have about 12 minutes left, and we'd love to answer any general questions you might have about what we talked about tonight with the eviction moratorium, tenants' rights, or tenants' resources. So I see someone just put in the chat that their mother is on the lease and that they live with her, and it seems like there's a specific question about legal representation. I don't know if we have time to get into that, but maybe there's just a quick answer that someone can offer them.
I can address that. All occupants in an apartment, if they're named in the eviction case, should respond, and all occupants will have counsel. If the same lawyer can represent both or all 3 occupants in a particular apartment, because there's no conflict of interest, as you might, husbands and wives often have the same counsel because they all have the same interests, then that'll happen. But if one party in an apartment is in a slightly different position than another, and it's appropriate to have separate lawyers to represent their separate interests, then we'll provide that too. It's part of the right to counsel process in housing court.
Thank you, Jordan. And I did see someone restated a question. I don't think I asked it correctly before. How can a landlord apply for ERAP without the tenant if the tenant is being uncooperative or they have not been able to get in contact with the tenant?
Like I stated in my presentation, this is a program where the tenant must apply and the landlord must apply. If the landlord can't actually get hold of the tenant, they are able to apply on the tenant's behalf if they have authorization from them. However, this program is required for the landlord to apply and for the tenant to apply for benefits.
Thank you, Brian. I see someone asked, can community social workers complete the ERAP application on behalf of a client or a tenant? And we just addressed the second part of that, but the question is, can a community group or a social worker complete the ERAP application on behalf of a client or a tenant?
Absolutely, a community worker can apply on behalf of a client or, on behalf of a tenant or a landlord, and both. All you have to do is call one of our community-based organizations, make an in-person appointment. We also do over the phone and Zoom applications. So if you just give us a call and schedule an appointment, we'll help you complete the application on the portal, and whether you're a landlord or a tenant.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I know we addressed this earlier in the presentation, but for those who may have signed on a little late, Satish, do you mind just giving that brief overview you gave about what aid homeowners can tap into at this time? I know this isn't something we largely covered tonight, but there are resources available.
Yes, so legal aid also helps homeowners. And so I understand the frustration that's been expressed by so many here. All I can reiterate is that we're all in this together, and we're just describing the resources for tenants in this particular situation. There is a homeowner assistance fund that is administered through the state, DHCR. I put the link in the chat. You can also call Housing Court Answers. It's for both landlords and tenants, and they can guide you in the right direction. And also it's worth saying that the Supreme Court did not strike the homeowner landlord protections in CFPA. Remember what CFPA stands for. The FP is foreclosure prevention. So the foreclosure hardship declaration portion is still valid. So for those who might say, well, tenants get away with it and landlords don't get any help, there's your example. There's your counterexample right there. The tenant part has been struck down. The landlord part is still standing. So if you're a homeowner who owns less than 10 units, you can delay your foreclosure. You can apply for assistance. You can work with your tenant and apply for ERAP to get that fund, those funds that you need to pay your mortgage. And let's hold hands. Let's be in this together. Let's get out of COVID before we start pointing fingers at each other and fighting over the scraps that we have here. So there are resources available. If you're facing foreclosure, you can call legal aid. We help homeowners in Queens and the Bronx who are facing foreclosure. We try to keep that investment. I know your home is your asset. You've worked your whole life to buy it, and sometimes you take on a tenant or two. We get that, and we can help you. And there's many resources that are available.
Thank you, Satish. And yes, we do understand that this is a very large housing landscape. So thank you for your patience as we've answered your questions. I think we have time for one or two more. I did see that someone asked in the chat, how much time does a landlord need to give a tenant to vacate an apartment? This is due to not non-payment, but due due to the building being sold and new owners wanting the building vacant. So I think this speaks to the eviction moratorium piece, if someone wants to answer that question.
So the question is, oh, sorry, was someone going to go ahead? Go ahead, Kayla.
Well, I was just going to say that it really depends on how long the tenant has been living there, or have you served them with the notice of termination yet? And that time frame also depends on how long they've lived there. Do they have a lease? There's a lot of different factors that might go into it. So if you want to call our hotline to figure out the first steps on what to do, you can do that and call our hotline tomorrow morning from 9 to 5. And that's all I want to say.
And just to follow up on that, after all of those appropriate notices are filed and served, then if the matter's not resolved, then you would have to file a lawsuit in court, an eviction lawsuit, and that would move as quickly as the Queens Housing Court is able to move those cases. You're not permitted to change the locks in advance of that. Only a judge can order the eviction of a tenant, no matter what the circumstances are, and only a city marshal can actually execute the warrant, come to the house and change those locks to lock a tenant out. So you have to be very careful in how you operate, but that's what courts are for, so that a judge can hear both sides of the situation and come to a right decision in the matter.
All right, thank you, Jordan. And I see there are some resources being posted to this chat. And anything that we've talked about tonight, I'm going to save the chat, any sort of resources that have been posted there, as well as all of the slides that have been discussed. We will make sure to aggregate everything and post it on our website, as well as the recorded session of this workshop. So in the interest of time, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. And thank you guys so much for being on this workshop today. I really appreciate everybody's candor. And actually, there's one last question. I will actually ask it so that we can get some information. So for the Excluded Workers Fund, can a person who received public assistance SNAP and cash still qualify? And Allie, do you want to take that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes, someone in the chat asked, for excluded workers, can a person who received public assistance, I guess SNAP and cash still qualify?
So the Excluded Workers Fund is solely on if you were unemployed or underemployed. So that doesn't trigger, like if you're receiving SNAP, it doesn't trigger that. They're only looking if you became unemployed or underemployed. So if you can prove all those three things, your identity, your residence, and you became unemployed or underemployed, you can apply. And again, it's a one-time benefit, so it's not on a rolling basis.
Sorry, great, thank you so much. And as you were speaking, I'm just gonna go ahead and put our housing page in the chat. I saw that someone asked where we can find this information that we talked about tonight. You can find it here. And then I believe it also, or the recorded session will be available on the Housing Court Answers YouTube channel. You'll be able to access it that way if you search for Housing Court Answers and look through their videos. And it looks like, okay, we have one last question. I'm a big proponent of questions. So the last question of tonight is the eviction moratorium definitely in effect through October 3rd?
No, there's no widespread eviction moratorium right now. If you want the protection of the order, you need to proactively fill out that declaration online, give it to your landlord and the court and maybe the city marshal. But that could expire whenever COVID cases in New York go down. It depends on COVID cases in New York. So if they go down, the order itself may expire. It also may be struck down in the same way that New York State's eviction moratorium was. So that's why we're really encouraging people to apply for ERAP.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question because there are protections in place, but the situation is in flux. So we will continue to keep people updated and do our best to connect with you. I just wanted to close and say thank you so much to our presenters for their help and their support. It is truly invaluable to hear from all of you. And we're all committed to helping tenants as much as we can and encourage everyone to reach out to us if you think you may need legal services or help with any funding applications. And I also want to say, I know we have some homeowners and landlords as well on this call. I know this was oriented towards tenants, but we do care about your situations as well. And we want to make sure that we can help you too. So with that, I just want to say thank you so much and have a great evening. Take care, everyone.